Hi, and welcome to Integrated Spectrum of Health. I'm excited today to talk to you about a topic that affects each and every one of us on some level. My name is Lynn Jocelyn. I'm a functional medicine physician assistant, certified food and spirit practitioner, and I weave together my years of work in both conventional and integrative settings as a physician assistant, my advanced training with the Institute for Functional Medicine, and my love of the 7 systems of health and certified food and spirit. So I'm glad you're here today, and I hope that you walk away with a little bit more information about stress and not only how it can affect our bodies in a negative ways, but how you can capitalize on it to help you with health. The mission is to empower people to optimize health through a functional medicine and colorful approach so that you can embody your birthright of vitality, connection, and joy, to wake up every day to do what lights you up and to choose to live your life on purpose. So today the topic is stress, friend or foe. My medical disclaimer, this information is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute specific medical advice or take the place of a practitioner-patient relationship. And do not start or discontinue any new supplements or new medications without having a conversation with your primary care practitioner. So our course agenda today, we are going to talk about the definition of stress, the 3 prongs of the stress response system, the physiology of stress in the human body, cortisol as we use it as a biomarker of stress in our bodies, looking at acute stress versus chronic stress impacts, and making friends with stress, how we can actually walk away with some tips and tools today that you can begin to employ and practice right away that will make a friendship with stress versus letting stress take over your body in a negative way. And then we'll close up. So let's take a look first at the definition of stress. This is the Webster Dictionary definition of stress. And over on the right side, I pulled out some words of each of these definitions: force, constraining, presses, pushes, pulls, compresses, intensity, deformation, and tension. So stress is something that has an impact on a body or a system to embody or to cause change, is really the way I think about looking at it. This is the definition of stress from Hans Seal, who's known as the father of modern stress research. He was the first person to really dig into stress as having an impact on our medical or physical systems. And he describes this as any event which may make demands upon the organism and to set in motion a non-specific bodily response, which leads to a variety of temporary or permanent physiological or structural changes. And the part I like to highlight is the non-specific response of the body to demand for change. And let's take a look at this a bit more. This is how we may be friends or foes with stress, depending on our stress level and our performance. Let's take a look at this. So under here in the lower part, when there's not a lot of stress, our performance may be low because we don't have that push, that pressure, that tension to get something done. And we need a little bit of that, and that's where stress can be positive in our lives. As we move up, stress level goes up, and our performance actually goes up. We're more alert, more focused. We can hit deadlines, get things done. We will, go up to the top of the curve to our optimal performance. Now, this is different for everyone. This may be more of a peak. This could be more of a plateau up here, but each of us have our own curve, and it's dynamic, always changing based on our bodily systems. But once we reach that optimal performance, if we continue to increase our stress level, the performance actually goes down. We start to experience anxiety, overwhelm, burnout. And so what we want to do is learn how to use stress to our benefit to stay in here where we're at our optimal performance and doing well. So stress, there's always a response. It is a non-specific response. Again, the body goes through multiple biochemical changes and readjustments to that stress trigger. And it doesn't matter what the nature of the stress is. It can be any different stresses. It can be an emotional stressor. It can be a physical stressor. The biochemical shifts and changes are similar in the body. Any type of stressor may produce the same type of physiological change or response. So let's talk a bit about adaptation, because this is really important when we look at chronic stress. This is the process by which the human system modifies itself to conform to the environment. It is a change that results from a response to stress. So looking at this stress adaptation, when the stressful situation becomes prolonged, the body then adapts to this new environment of higher stress, this new biochemical shifts, changes, and inflammatory markers in the body. And it learns to live at this high stress environment. And this is what we consider the new normal in the body. But over time, systems cannot sustain this high stress environment. And this is when dysfunction or disease happens. So big, broad overview, stress and the body. We have the brain here gets an alarm system at danger. It gets activated, sends signals to our adrenal gland, which are glands that sit right above the kidney here. And they kick out a bunch of stress hormones. And then we get body-wide changes, which we will go over. This is the 3 prongs to the stress response system. We have the limbic system, which is the immediate response. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which stimulates the adrenal glands to kick out adrenaline. And then we have the HPA axis over here, and that's our hypothalamus in the brain, sends a signal to the pituitary gland in the brain, which sends a signal to the adrenal gland to kick out cortisol. This is the limbic system. Let's talk about that first, because that's the primitive, the primary response in our body to stress. So the prefrontal cortex is this front area, the forehead area of the brain. And that's where we do analyzing, thinking, executive functioning. So that's constantly working throughout the day. We then store that information over in the hippocampus. That's our filing system. So not only do we store stuff there, but we will request stuff from there. We'll retain, we'll ask for it, we'll send it. So there is a back and forth system between the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. And this is what happens when stress enters the picture. The stress comes on, and the amygdala, this little tiny area in the deep in the brain, gets activated. And when that gets activated by fear, by stress, this system that goes from prefrontal cortex to our hippocampus, our memories and our filing system, is interrupted and it's stopped. When that happens, the alarm system from the hypothalamus sends out the EMS, and all these signals and cascades get put into play. So initially, the first system after the limbic system has done its thing, now we're calling in the EMS, the emergency medical system of our stress, and we kick out a bunch of adrenaline. Adrenaline is that very short-lived, also known as epinephrine, and norepinephrine is also part of this process, but it's that quick response, so that immediate heart race, that sweating, your vision gets more focused. But adrenaline does not stay in our system very long. And if all we had was adrenaline, we would burn out very quickly. So then we go to the next layer, and this is our cortisol. So adrenaline gets kicked out, then the adrenal glands kick out cortisol. Cortisol has more of a sustained response in the body to help us move through that stress response. So the physiology of stress in and of itself. So this is just a basic list. There's many more things happen with stress, but it raises our blood sugar because we need more fuel in the body to fight the stressor. Causes insulin resistance, making it harder for glucose to enter the cells. This is when the insulin resistance happens, when the stress is sustained. It will increase hunger and sugar cravings over time, decrease your ability to burn fat efficiently. It suppresses that HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and this will cause hormone imbalances, increases belly fat, increases risk of fatty liver, and raises the level of fatty acids and triglycerides in your blood. So a better look at that with even more detail is effects of chronic stress. Now, this is when the stress is sustained in the body, and we'll talk about that more later in the class, but brain and nervous system activates the fight or flight response. We just talked about that. Our respiratory systems, we may get short of breath. We may have mismatch of our oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusion and how that's working. And over time, that can cause lung disease. Our adrenal glands can get overworked and fatigued. Heart and blood vessels, heart rate goes up. Blood pressure can go up and risk of persistent high blood pressure. Less blood flow to our digestive system, so we may get abdominal cramping, abdominal pain. Things may not get digested or absorbed as well. Can trigger, over the long haul, can trigger things like IBS or flares of intestinal discomfort. Reproductive organs, we can get decreased libido and fertility, and this has to do with our hormone responses to the chronic stress and increase the severity of PMS. The musculoskeletal. So if our muscles are not getting a sustained amount of energy or blood flow, we may get tight muscles, tension, headaches, migraines. So this is just a few again, but this is a great handout to take a look at the physiology of chronic stress in the body. This is another look. So stress hits the brain. We already know it turns on the hypothalamus. And the pituitary gland sends signals to the adrenal gland. And the adrenal gland kicks out more than one hormone, but in our purposes today, we're talking about cortisol. When cortisol is in the body thinks, oh my gosh, there's cortisol. We need more energy because we've got to run or fight or flight. And so the cortisol sends a signal to the liver to create more sugar, to make more glucose. But the problem with this system, if it's over time, if it's a short acute system, it's great. But when it's sustained, it actually costs energy to make glucose in our liver. Over here, it costs 6 ATP. You can think of ATP as our energy currency of the body to make glucose, and 2 ATP are, so we're trying to make more ATP and more energy for the stress factor. But when cortisol is out, goes to the liver, tells the liver to make glucose. To make that glucose, it costs 6 ATP. The glucose then goes out in the body to act as fuel, and it makes only 2 ATP. So there is a disconnect there of 4 ATP. And this is why chronically stressed people have no energy, they have elevated blood sugar, and that increases risk of diabetes. This is a look at the HPA axis. So stress is here. It tells the body to make cortisol. So in an initial stressor, we get increased blood pressure, heart rate, changes metabolism and biochemistry instantly. That's the initial stress. So this is how we can use cortisol as a biomarker in the body. And initially, we may see our morning cortisol go up, and then it goes back down and stays in the green. That's the first response that our HPA axis is beginning to have dysfunction. If that stress continues, we have what's called high cortisol in the body. And you see here, the cortisol goes up in the morning and it stays high all day. We want the cortisol curve to be in the green. If the body sustains that over time, this causes many things: weight gain, brain fog, GI dysfunction, irritability. And if that's sustained over time, eventually we get low cortisol and the body doesn't respond to stressors as it should, and it stays low and flat. So that was what I was just talking about. The main biomarker of stress is cortisol. We do not have easy ways to test what the limbic system is doing. And as we learn the sympathetic nervous system, the first thing it kicks out is adrenaline. Adrenaline is degraded in our body very quickly, so it's not around long enough for us to test that. So we rely on cortisol as a biomarker in the body for stress. Cortisol is a steroid hormone. It regulates the immune system and also metabolism of other vital processes in the body. It's intimately connected to our glucose and insulin systems in our body. It's the primary stress hormone. And again, it's the one that we can measure. It stimulates the production and the release of glucose in times of stress. It enhances the brain's ability to use that glucose as fuel, and it curbs bodily processes that are not essential during stress. Cortisol, in a perfectly functioning system, we're exposed to stress and cortisol. It goes up. When the stressor is removed, we're safe, and it returns back to normal. That's what we want to happen. Cortisol is not always bad. We need it. It's very effective in that short-term use. The curve I showed you earlier is something called a diurnal curve, and that tells us what the cortisol is doing in a 24-hour period. This is intimately connected to our circadian rhythm, which is slightly different for each of us, and it's individual. And it has this diurnal curve, gives us information about the health of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So this is that axis again. In the brain, the hypothalamus gets a signal that there's stress, stimulates the pituitary, that's also part of the brain, to kick out some cortisol from the adrenal glands. Cortisol then goes to the body and has all those functions that we talked about and feeds back to the brain. Another way to look at this, stress connects to the hypothalamus, tells the pituitary, kicks to the adrenal gland, cortisol is released. So stress stimulates the brain to release ACTH, which stimulates the adrenals to release cortisol and other hormones. This is the circadian rhythm, and this is the cortisol curve within a good rhythm. It peaks early in the morning and goes down all day, goes back up in the morning, and that's a nice circadian rhythm cortisol diurnal curve. Let's look at some different ones here. Now the blue in each of these next pictures is a normal cortisol curve. It peaks in the morning and then throughout the day continues to go down. In the evening, it's low, you're ready for bed. In this one, in this person in the orange here, it's very flat in the morning and slowly increases all day, and then it's very high at night. So this is somebody that I would expect to be really lethargic and tired, hard to motivate in the morning and not be able to sleep. So increased chances of insomnia. Second cortisol curve here, remember the blue is the normal. This person, they rise in the morning, but they rise a little bit more. So they might be overactive, over alert, little jittery in the morning. And then they stay high with their cortisol. So they may have symptoms of anxiety, hyper sensitive to sounds, light, to anything going on in their environment, and probably having trouble sleeping because it's still high in the evening. This third curve, again, the blue is normal. This is what we call the flat cortisol curve. And this is typically the third stage in HPA axis dysfunction. There's no rise in the morning and they stay flat and low all day. This is somebody who is exhausted, constant brain fog, maybe body aches. And when they are posed with a stressor, they don't have the biochemical processes in place because of this flat cortisol to really respond robustly to that stressor. And so those events, those triggers, so stress can make them even more exhausted because the body will try, but it doesn't have that reserve. And so it flatlines. So let's talk about acute and chronic stress. Acute stressors, you have an injury, you have a conflict with your partner, maybe you eat something really spicy or get a sunburn or a muscle pain. Chronic stress, this is when some ideas of chronic stress, burnout for work. Maybe you have chronic neck or back or leg pain. Work, family, environment, everything's coming at you at once. and perhaps you are dealing with a chronic disease. So let's take a look at this in the way of the general adaptation syndrome. This is for chronic stress. We get this over here, normal physiology, things are clicking away okay. We get the stress alarm. The body kicks into the limbic system, the sympathetic nervous system, and then the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, the three systems we took a look at, those all get turned on. We then move up into this resistance phase. This is if the stressor is prolonged. And so this resistance phase continues the biochemical changes in the body to continue to handle the stressor that is staying around. Over time, this gets pretty exhausted and the danger passes and this exhaustion drops. Oh, if the danger passes, then we have the opportunity to reboot or get back to normal physiology. So this is where I want to talk about why stress can be our friend and how to capitalize on that for health versus just letting stress happen to you and cause dysfunction. So this paper it was a review paper that looked at short-term stresses, and they called it Mother Nature's mechanism for enhancing protection and performance under conditions of threat, challenge, and opportunity. So stress is part of our lives. Everyone has it. We have external stresses, work stresses, family stresses, relationship stresses, positive stresses. Maybe you're moving to a new town, buying a new house. That's a great, exciting, positive thing, and it's stressful. Getting married is stressful. Job changes are stressful. So stress is part of our life. Then we have internal stresses. So the biological functions in our body, one of them is just waking up every day. That is an internal stress, and we see that with the cortisol curve. So I want to bring up something that this paper shared called the stress spectrum, and to understand how we can optimize and harness the beneficial effects of short-term stress. So let's look at this curve one more time. Remember down here, when we don't have a lot of stress, we're kind of unstimulated, unmotivated. As the stress level goes up on this axis here, we become more alert. And also so stress is a friend on this side of the curve. We get protection for our immunity, increased mental and physical performance, increased health and well-being. The tricky part is when we tip over, that's when anxiety, overwhelm, distress, and dysfunction ensue. So how do we stay in that short-term stressors, but bring it back down to baseline? That's the key. So taking a look at this, this is the physiological stress response. This up here is great. This is what we want to see. We have quick short-term stressors, and we respond. We go back down to this green, the baseline. Not so good when we stay in that stress response and we don't recover. Then if this goes on for too long, what will happen is we get the prolonged increased exposure to stress, and that's where we get disease, chronic disease, and dysfunction. So taking a look at staying on the good side of the stress spectrum, I thought this was a really good infographic. Up here, take a look at this. They have the acute stressor, goes back to normal physiology. Then those stressors begin to build up and they stay high. How do we take this scenario and bring it down to this one? So lifestyle factors are very important. Restorative sleep, really good whole foods, nutrition, physical activity is important, movement every day. Looking at our psychosocial things that are going on. How are we doing in our relationships? What's our social support? Are we really authentically living our passions? And then activities, certain mindfulness activities, yoga, spiritual practices, exercises, nature, all of these things. So in the blue here, working on all of these help us to have the acute stress, bring it back down to the resting zone. So we're going to optimize these short-term good stresses and minimize the bad stress, the sustained chronic stress. This will increase our protective immunity, increase mental and physical performance, and increase health and well-being. So how do we do this? That's the big question. So I'm going to give you some tips and tools. The The simplest way to think about this is through the sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system. So our sympathetic nervous system, that's our fight or flight that prepares the body for danger. It is the first thing that goes on for that activation of the stress response. And so given short-term stresses, this goes on, that's okay. We want that. The body needs that. What we want to be able to do, and this is the key that I want you to walk away from with this talk, is we want to learn how to turn on, how to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. This is where we rest and digest. This brings the body into a state of calm. It has a slower response, and it promotes something called homeostasis. That is balance in all the systems of the body. What's happened in our culture, because people are living with more constant stressors, is we are living longer periods of time in the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic should be short and quick. We want to learn how to live longer in the parasympathetic nervous system. So foundational lifestyle practices to support HPA health. That's your hypothalamus pituitary axis health. This also supports your moving into the parasympathetic nervous system. What do we do? So what I'd like you to do is either pause the video and grab a piece of paper, and I want you to take one thing from each of these categories that you can begin to work on. So nutrition, make sure you're having whole, nourishing foods, phytonutrient-rich foods, so beautiful colors of produce bring in those important phytonutrients. You're eating regular meals. You're not skipping and getting low blood sugars and then spikes in your blood sugar. Healthy quality fats such as avocados, avocado oil, coconut oil, olive oil, and sourcing when you can organic, high-quality produce and animal products. And I always default to local when I can, even in the cases of organic versus not. If we can bring things and get to know our farmers, there's many layers of health in that relationship. Sleep, quality of sleep is important. 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, sleep hygiene tips, things like no electronics in the bedroom, maybe taking a warm bath, a warm cup of chamomile tea. All those things set us up for that quality sleep. If there's any question of sleep apnea or any sleep dysfunction in that you need to address, I highly recommend that as an early part of your helping with your health. Movement, daily regular movement with intention. Do something that brings you joy. Tailor this to your personal health. What works for you? For some people, less is more. If somebody is overtraining, that might in and of itself may be affecting their HPA axis, and we may need to bring in more restorative movement. If somebody is really sedentary, going to an extreme exercise program is going to cause more stress. So looking at in the aspect of being less sedentary and then adding more movement. Mindfulness, daily time for pause, and it doesn't take a lot. Remember to reset. You are taking yourself from that sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic. Mindful activities, time in nature, meditation, prayer, journaling, or gratitude practices. Relationships. Take a look at your relationships and do a relationship inventory. Are there people that you're with and spending time with, and then you leave and you feel depleted and exhausted? Think about those relationships, and maybe they're not the best for your health right now. If there's people that when you're with, you come home, you're energized, you feel good, you feel grounded, you feel like you can be yourself with them, those are relationships you want to nourish. Nourish the relationship with yourself. Clear communication, and ultimately make time for joy and playfulness. That is really important for our health. Community. Being in service and community has been really shown to be supportive for our stress. When we're focusing out, if we're really stressed and spinning about something, focus out, be in community, be in service, and that will help kind of look at the bigger picture and help us with our stress. Create community with those who are supportive, keep the well-being of each other as a priority. So thank you for staying today and listening to a bit about stress, something that affects each and every one of us. I look forward to seeing you at the next presentation, and I hope you have a beautiful day.